Reuben Pike put his brother in the ground before breakfast. But when the sun began to set, the real one came limping into town, half dead, and asking who was buried in his place. The sun beat down on Reuben Pike's back, each drop of sweat a testament to the grim task at hand. The air hung thick with the smell of pine and something else, something metallic and sickening that he couldn't quite shake. He wiped his brow with a dirt-stained bandana, his gaze fixed on the shallow grave he'd just dug. It wasn't much, but it was all he could offer. He'd found the body that morning, sprawled near the riverbank, mangled beyond easy recognition. The face, well, the face was gone. But the clothes, the build, the silver ring on the left hand, it all pointed to Caleb, his brother, gone too soon. Reuben's heart ached, a dull, heavy throb in his chest. Caleb had always been the wild one, the charmer, the risk-taker. Reuben, on the other hand, preferred the quiet solitude of his ranch. They were different as night and day, but the bond between them was unbreakable, or so he thought. He lowered the burlap-wrapped body into the ground, his hands trembling. He mumbled a prayer, the words catching in his throat. He wasn't a religious man, but he figured Caleb deserved something. As the first clods of dirt hit the makeshift coffin, a wave of anger washed over him. Who would do this? Who would butcher a man like that? He vowed to find them, to make them pay for what they'd done. He worked quickly, driven by a mixture of grief and rage. The sun dipped lower, casting long, eerie shadows across the landscape. By the time he was finished, the grave was a simple mound of earth, marked only by a crude wooden cross he'd fashioned from a fallen branch. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the grave, the silence broken only by the chirping of crickets. The air grew cooler, a sign that night was coming. He knew he should head back to town, tell folks what happened. But he couldn't bring himself to move. He felt a strange sense of unease, a nagging feeling that something wasn't right. He pushed it aside, blaming it on the shock and grief. He turned to leave, his boots heavy with sorrow. He had a promise to keep to his brother. He trudged back towards town, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and blood red, a fitting backdrop, he thought grimly. The saloon would be bustling, folks unwinding after a hard day's work. He'd have to break the news to them, to Martha, Caleb's sweetheart. That thought was almost unbearable. Main Street was exactly as he expected, alive with noise and light. Horses were tethered to the hitching posts, their tails swishing lazily. Music spilled from the saloon doors, a piano player hammering out a lively tune. Reuben paused, steeling himself. Then he saw him. Staggering towards the light, a figure emerged from the shadows at the edge of town. He was covered in blood, his clothes torn to shreds. He moved with a desperate, almost inhuman effort, each step a monumental struggle. Reuben squinted, trying to make out who it was. The figure stumbled, nearly falling, then righted himself with a groan. As he drew closer, Reuben's breath hitched in his throat. It couldn't be, but it was. Caleb, his face was a mask of cuts and bruises, one eye swollen shut. He was barely conscious, but he was alive. "Reuben," Caleb croaked, his voice raspy and weak. He reached out a trembling hand. Reuben stood frozen, his mind reeling. He'd just buried him, or at least he thought he had. The music from the saloon faded into a distant hum. The laughter and chatter died down as people noticed the newcomer. A hush fell over Main Street. Reuben rushed forward, catching Caleb as he collapsed. "Caleb, what happened? I thought." Caleb coughed, blood flecking his lips. They set me up, Reuben. You gotta help me." He squeezed Reuben's arm weakly before passing out. Reuben stared down at his brother's unconscious form, his heart pounding in his chest. Who did he bury, and what in the world had Caleb gotten himself into? He knew one thing, whatever was going on, it was far from over. This was just the beginning. The saloon doors swung open, and two men, silent and grim, helped Reuben carry Caleb inside. Martha rushed forward, her face a mask of worry. "Caleb, what in the name of heaven?" Reuben gently laid Caleb on a makeshift bed of blankets in a back room. Doc Higgins, the town's aging physician, was summoned, his face etched with concern as he examined Caleb's injuries. "He's lost a lot of blood," Doc Higgins said, his voice grave. "Got a nasty gash on his head, a couple of broken ribs. He's lucky to be alive." Reuben watched anxiously as Doc Higgins cleaned and bandaged Caleb's wounds. Martha hovered nearby, her eyes filled with tears. He had to tell them, had to explain what he'd done. I found a body this morning," Reuben began, his voice thick with guilt. "By the river. I thought it was Caleb." "Oh, that—" Martha gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. You buried someone else." Reuben nodded, shame washing over him. I'm sorry, Martha, the face, it was gone, but the clothes, the ring, it looked like him. Who was it, Reuben? Doc Higgins asked, his brow furrowed. Who did you bury? Reuben shook his head. I don't know, that's what I can't figure out. Why would someone want us to think Caleb was dead? The room fell silent, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. It was more than just a case of mistaken identity. Someone had deliberately tried to deceive them, to make them believe Caleb was dead. Caleb stirred, groaning softly. His eyes fluttered open, and he looked around the room, confusion clouding his gaze. Reuben, he whispered, what happened? You were attacked, Caleb, Reuben said gently. Someone left you for dead. Caleb's eyes widened in fear. They wanted me gone, Reuben. They wanted me silenced. Silenced about what, Caleb? Reuben pressed, his voice urgent. What did you see? Caleb hesitated, his gaze darting around the room as if he were afraid of being overheard. Then he leaned closer to Reuben, his voice barely a whisper. The mine, it's not silver they're digging for. The mine, Reuben thought, the old Blackwood mine just outside of town. Everyone knew it had been tapped dry years ago. What were they really looking for, and who was willing to kill to keep it a secret? Reuben sat beside Caleb's bed, his mind racing. The Blackwood mine, what could be so important there that someone would kill for it? He knew he had to find out, not just for Caleb, but for the sake of the town. Who's running the mine now, Caleb? Reuben asked, keeping his voice low. Caleb winced in pain. Silas Blackwood, the old man's son, he's been bringing in men from out of town, working day and night. Silas Blackwood, Reuben knew him, a ruthless, ambitious man, always looking for an edge. He wouldn't put anything past him. What did you see, Caleb? What exactly were they digging for? Caleb hesitated, his eyes filled with fear. Gold, Reuben, not just any gold, a whole vein of it, enough to make a man rich beyond his wildest dreams. Gold, that explained a lot, but it didn't explain who the dead man was. Caleb, I need you to think, Reuben said, his voice urgent. The man I buried, did you recognize him? Had you ever seen him before? Caleb closed his eyes, concentrating. After a moment, he shook his head. No, he looked familiar, like someone I should know, but I can't place him. Reuben sighed. This was getting them nowhere. They needed answers, and they needed them fast. Martha spoke up, her voice trembling. Maybe it was someone who worked at the mine, someone who got in Silas Blackwood's way. It was a possibility, a chilling one. If Silas Blackwood was willing to kill for gold, who knew how many other bodies were hidden in those dark tunnels? We need to go back there, Reuben, Caleb said, his voice weak but determined. We need to see what they're hiding. Reuben knew he was right. It was a dangerous proposition, but they had no choice. They had to find out the truth, no matter the cost. All right, Caleb, Reuben said, his jaw set. We'll go to the mine, but we're going to need some help. He looked at Martha, his eyes filled with determination. And we're going to need to be careful. This could be a fight for our lives. Reuben spent the next hour gathering supplies and enlisting help. He trusted only a few people in town, Old Man Withers, the grizzled owner of the general store, and Deputy Johnson, a young, earnest lawman who always seemed to be out of his depth. Withers, despite his age, was sharp as a tack. He listened intently as Reuben explained the situation, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. Blackwood, always knew he was trouble. Heard whispers about him bringing in hired guns, keeping folks away from the mine. Have you heard anything about a stranger, Withers? Reuben asked. Someone who might have crossed Blackwood. Withers stroked his beard thoughtfully. Now that you mention it, a few weeks back, a fella came through town asking questions about the mine, claimed he was a geologist, but he didn't look like no rock hound to me. Said he was looking for rare minerals. Did he say anything else? Just that he had a hunch the mine was hiding something big. Blackwood didn't take kindly to his questions, I can tell you that. Saw them arguing outside the saloon one night. The stranger left town the next morning. Deputy Johnson, meanwhile, was hesitant but ultimately agreed to help. I can't officially investigate without proof, Reuben, he said, his voice laced with worry. But I'll keep an eye on things, see if I can find anything suspicious. As Reuben prepared to leave, Martha pulled him aside. Be careful, Reuben, she pleaded, her eyes filled with fear. Caleb needs you. I will, Reuben promised, squeezing her hand. We'll get to the bottom of this, Martha, I promise you that. As Reuben and Deputy Johnson rode towards the Blackwood mine, a sense of foreboding settled over him. He knew they were walking into a hornet's nest. Silas Blackwood wouldn't hesitate to protect his gold, no matter the cost, and Reuben was determined to stop him, even if it meant risking everything. He knew that he had to be brave, and he knew that this was the right thing to do. He would make his brother proud. He would not let this town down. He was ready for anything. As they rode, Reuben replayed the events of the past day in his mind, searching for any detail he might have missed. The body by the river, the silver ring, it all seemed so deliberate. It wasn't just a random killing, Johnson, Reuben said, his voice grim. Someone wanted me to think Caleb was dead. Johnson frowned. But why go to all that trouble? Why not just kill Caleb and be done with it? Because they needed me to bury the body, Reuben realized, a chilling thought settling over him. They needed to cover up their tracks. They wanted everyone to believe Caleb was gone so no one would ask questions. So the dead man, he was dressed like Caleb? Johnson asked, his eyes widening. Not exactly, Reuben replied. The clothes were similar but not identical. The build was close enough to fool me in the dim light, and the ring, that's what really convinced me. But where did they get the ring? Johnson wondered aloud. Suddenly Reuben stopped his horse, his eyes fixed on the ground. He dismounted and knelt beside a patch of disturbed earth. What is it, Reuben? Johnson asked, dismounting as well. Reuben picked up a small, tarnished piece of metal. It was a clasp, broken and twisted. It's from a vest, Reuben said, his voice low. A vest like the one Caleb always wore. He examined the clasp more closely. There were traces of blood on it. They must have taken it from Caleb after they attacked him, Reuben realized. They used it to make the dead man look more like him. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Someone had meticulously planned Caleb's murder, going to great lengths to ensure that his body was mistaken for Caleb's. It was a calculated assassination, designed to silence him permanently. They didn't just want Caleb dead, Johnson, Reuben said, his voice filled with anger. They wanted him erased, and they almost succeeded. He stood up, his jaw set with determination. We're not just dealing with a gold rush anymore, Johnson. We're dealing with a conspiracy, and we're going to expose it no matter what it takes. They had to figure out who this man was and why they wanted to make it look like his brother. What could make someone so cruel? They urged their horses onward, the Blackwood mine looming closer with each passing moment. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long, ominous shadows across the landscape. Reuben knew they were running out of time. If Silas Blackwood discovered they were snooping around, there would be no turning back. We need to be careful, Johnson, Reuben said, his voice low. Blackwood will have guards posted all over the place. I brought my rifle, Johnson replied, patting the weapon strap to his saddle. And I know these hills like the back of my hand. Will be fine. As they approached the mine, they could hear the sounds of activity, the clang of pickaxes, the rumble of carts, the shouts of men. It was clear that Blackwood's operation was in full swing. They dismounted a safe distance from the entrance and crept forward on foot, using the shadows as cover. The mine entrance was guarded by two burly men, both armed with rifles. We can't get past them without a fight, Johnson whispered. Reuben nodded. I have an idea. You create a diversion. Draw their attention away from the entrance. I'll sneak around the back and see if I can find another way in. Johnson hesitated. That's risky, Reuben. We don't have a choice, Reuben said. Caleb's life may depend on it. Johnson took a deep breath. All right, but be careful. He drew his rifle and fired a shot into the air. The guards immediately turned their attention towards the sound, their rifles raised. Hey, what was that? One of the guards shouted. Johnson fired another shot, closer this time. Come and get me, you sidewinders, he yelled, running towards a nearby thicket of trees. The guards hesitated for a moment, then gave chase, leaving the mine entrance unguarded. Reuben seized his opportunity and slipped away into the darkness, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that Johnson was risking his life to create this diversion. He couldn't let him down. He was so nervous he could feel sweat dripping down his face. This could be it, he thought. This could be the end. He could feel the pressure rising, but he knew that he needed to stay calm. He needed to do this for Caleb. He needed to do this for his town. Reuben circled around the back of the mine, his senses on high alert. The terrain was rough and uneven, making his progress slow and difficult. He could hear Johnson's shouts echoing in the distance, followed by the sound of gunfire. He knew that Johnson couldn't hold them off forever. He finally reached the back of the mine, where he found a small, unguarded entrance. It was dark and narrow, but it was his only option. He took a deep breath and slipped inside. The air inside the mine was thick with dust and the smell of damp earth. The only light came from a few flickering lanterns, casting eerie shadows on the walls. He could hear the sounds of men working deeper inside the mine. He crept forward, his hand resting on the handle of his revolver. He didn't know what he would find inside, but he was prepared for anything. Meanwhile, back in town, Caleb, despite his injuries, was restless. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something, a crucial piece of the puzzle that could unlock the whole mystery. "Martha," he said, his voice strained, "I need to go back to the grave." Martha looked at him in disbelief. "Caleb, you're in no condition to go anywhere. You need to rest." "I know, but I have a feeling," Caleb insisted. "There might be something there, something we missed, something that could tell us who that man was." Martha hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but I'm going with you, and we're taking Withers." They gathered shovels and lanterns and set out towards the gravesite, their hearts filled with a mixture of hope and dread. As they approached the grave, they could feel a sense of unease settling over them. It was as if the very earth was whispering secrets. They began to dig, their shovels biting into the soft earth. The air grew heavy with the smell of decay. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached the burlap-wrapped body. With trembling hands, they unwrapped the body, revealing the face of the unknown man. As Martha held up the lantern, Caleb gasped. Tucked inside the man's vest pocket was a small, leather-bound book. It was a journal, and on the cover, etched in faded ink, was a name, Elias Thorne. Elias Thorne, the geologist. The man who had asked too many questions, the man who had disappeared. They finally knew who Reuben had buried, but what secrets did Elias Thorne's journal hold? Inside the Blackwood mine, Reuben moved cautiously through the dimly lit tunnels. He could hear the sounds of men working ahead, their voices echoing off the walls. He kept to the shadows, trying to avoid detection. He finally reached a large cavern where he saw a group of men digging into a wall of rock. Silas Blackwood stood nearby, overseeing the operation. He was a tall, imposing figure, his face hard and unyielding. Reuben watched as the men unearthed a large vein of gold, their eyes gleaming with greed. He knew that Blackwood would stop at nothing to protect his newfound wealth. Meanwhile, back at the saloon, Caleb, Martha, and Withers were poring over Elias Thorne's journal. The entries were filled with technical jargon and geological observations, but they soon found something that caught their attention. "He writes about a hidden passage," Martha said, her voice trembling. "A passage that leads to a secret chamber deep within the mine." "What's in the chamber?" Caleb asked, his eyes wide with anticipation. Withers squinted at the journal. "He says it contains evidence of Blackwood's illegal activities, land grabs, rigged deals, all sorts of dirty business." It was all starting to make sense. Blackwood wasn't just mining for gold, he was using the mine to hide his criminal empire, and Elias Thorne had stumbled upon his secret. Caleb realized that Blackwood had tried to kill him because Caleb was getting close to finding out what Blackwood was doing. Caleb was so furious he could feel his blood boiling. Just then, Deputy Johnson burst into the saloon, his face pale with fear. "Blackwood's men are looking for Reuben," he exclaimed. "They know he's at the mines." Caleb's heart sank. Reuben was in danger, and it was all his fault. He and Martha and Withers had to do something, and they had to do it fast. "We need to get to the mine," Caleb said, his voice filled with determination. "We need to warn Reuben. He may be injured, but he wasn't about to let his brother face Blackwood alone. He was determined to save Reuben, even if it meant risking his own life. He would make sure that Blackwood paid for what he had done. He would make sure that justice was served. He would stop Blackwood. Now, as Caleb, Martha, and Withers raced towards the Blackwood mine, they could hear the sounds of a fierce gunfight echoing in the distance. They knew that Reuben was in the thick of it. Inside the mine, Reuben found himself surrounded by Blackwood's men. He fought bravely, but he was outnumbered. He knew he couldn't hold out much longer. Just as he was about to be overwhelmed, he heard a familiar voice. "Reuben, look out." Caleb, Martha, and Withers burst into the cavern, guns blazing. They joined the fight, evening the odds. Silas Blackwood watched in disbelief as his carefully laid plans crumbled before his eyes. He knew he had to do something drastic. He grabbed Martha and held a gun to her head. "Everyone, drop your weapons," he shouted, "or the woman dies." Reuben and Caleb hesitated, their hearts pounding in their chests. They couldn't risk Martha's life. "All right, Blackwood," Reuben said, his voice filled with anger. "We'll drop our guns, just let her go." Blackwood smirked. "Not so fast, I have a few questions for you first." He turned to Caleb. "It seems you've been snooping around where you shouldn't be. You know too much about my operation." "I know that you're a greedy, ruthless man who's willing to kill to get what he wants," Caleb retorted. Blackwood's face darkened. "You should have kept your nose out of my business, Caleb. Now you're going to pay the price." He revealed that it was he who had set Caleb up, and that Elias Thorne was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had planned to silence Caleb permanently, but Reuben's intervention had foiled his plans. He thought if he dressed up the man like his brother, it would be easy to have everyone think it was him. Blackwood thought that was his best plan, and it was ruined. Just then, Deputy Johnson arrived, leading a posse of townsfolk. They surrounded the mine, cutting off Blackwood's escape. Blackwood realized he was trapped. He knew his reign of terror was over. He lunged at Caleb, intending to take him down with him, but Reuben stepped in front of his brother, taking the bullet in the chest. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. Caleb rushed to Reuben's side, his heart filled with grief and guilt. "Reuben, stay with me." Reuben coughed, blood trickling from his lips. "Don't worry about me, Caleb," he whispered. "Just make sure Blackwood pays for what he's done." Deputy Johnson and the posse quickly apprehended Blackwood and his remaining men. They were taken into custody, their reign of terror finally over. Reuben was rushed back to town, where Doc Higgins worked tirelessly to save his life, but it was no use. The bullet had pierced his lung, and there was nothing more he could do. As Reuben lay dying, he looked at Caleb, his eyes filled with love and pride. "You always were the wild one, Caleb," he whispered. "But you have a good heart, don't ever forget that." With those words, Reuben closed his eyes and took his last breath. Caleb was devastated. He had lost his brother, his protector, his best friend. In the days that followed, the town of Redemption came together to mourn Reuben's death and celebrate his life. He was hailed as a hero, a man who had sacrificed everything to protect his town and his family. Blackwood and his men were brought to justice, their crimes exposed for all to see. They were sentenced to long prison terms, their dreams of wealth and power shattered. Caleb, with the help of Martha and Withers, made sure that Elias Thorne received a proper burial. They erected a headstone with his name on it, honoring his courage and sacrifice. As Caleb stood by Thorne's grave, he felt a sense of closure. He finally understood what had happened, and he knew that Reuben hadn't died in vain. He and his brother were so close, and he was grateful that Reuben was able to save him. Now he was going to make sure that he would do good in the world, and he would make sure that he would make his brother proud. The town was finally at peace, knowing that the land baron and his cronies would never threaten them again. The sun set over the town of Redemption, casting a golden glow on the graves of Reuben Pike and Elias Thorne, two men who had given everything to protect what they believed in. Two heroes, forever remembered in the hearts of the people they had saved.